The starship Eclipse drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space. Its sleek metallic frame glinted faintly under the light of a distant sun. Inside, life buzzed with activity as the crew carried out their duties. Among them was Ethan. Cole, a young cadet who stood out for all the wrong reasons, or so it seemed to his peers. Ethan wasn't like the others. While most of the crew laughed, joked, and shared meals together, Ethan kept to himself. He preferred the quiet corners of the ship, avoiding conversations unless absolutely necessary. Some thought he was shy, while others believed he simply didn't care about fitting in. But those who worked closely with him knew better. Ethan had sharp instincts and an uncanny ability to solve problems that left even seasoned officers scratching their heads. Ethan's reputation aboard the Eclipse was built on actions rather than words. During drills, he moved with precision, completing tasks faster than anyone else. In emergencies, his calm demeanor helped stabilize situations when panic threatened to take over. Yet despite these qualities, there was something distant about him, as if he carried a weight no one else could see. His silence made people curious but also wary. They wondered what went on inside his mind, behind those piercing gray eyes that always seemed to be watching everything. Captain Lisa Monroe noticed this about Ethan too. She'd observed him since he joined the crew 6 months ago. At first, she assumed his quiet nature was just a phase, something he'd grow out of as he settled into life aboard the ship. But as time passed, it became clear that Ethan's silence wasn't going anywhere. Still, she respected him. There was strength in his stillness, a kind of quiet confidence that couldn't be faked. And now, as the Eclipse ventured deeper into uncharted territory, Captain Monroe found herself grateful for every member of her crew, including Ethan. It started with a signal. A faint blip on the long-range scanners caught the attention of Daniel Hayes, the ship's communications specialist. At first, it seemed like interference, just another random noise bouncing around the void of space. But as Daniel fine-tuned the equipment, the signal grew stronger. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. "Captain," he called out, his voice tinged with excitement, "you need to hear this." Lisa hurried over to the console, her brow furrowing as she listened. The sound was strange, almost melodic, yet undeniably artificial. "Where is it coming from?" she asked. "Sector 42B," Daniel replied, pointing at the holographic map hovering above the control panel. "Looks like it's originating from a nearby planet." "That's odd," Lisa muttered. "We haven't detected any signs of intelligent life in this region before." She turned to address the crew. "Prepare a reconnaissance team. We're going down to investigate." Ethereal gas giants loomed in the distance as the Eclipse adjusted its course toward the mysterious planet. From orbit, it appeared lush and vibrant, covered in dense jungles and crisscrossed by rivers that shimmered like liquid silver. But beauty often masked danger, and Lisa knew better than to let her guard down. As the shuttlecraft descended through the atmosphere, the crew marveled at the alien landscape below. Towering trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves glowing faintly in hues of green and gold. Strange creatures flitted between branches, some resembling birds, others more insect-like with iridescent wings. The landing site was chosen carefully, a clearing near the source of the signal. As the shuttle touched down, Ethan stepped out alongside Rachel Dawson, the ship's medic, and 2 other crew members. Each wore lightweight armor equipped with environmental sensors and communication devices. Weapons were holstered at their sides, though no one expected trouble. After all, they were here to explore, not fight. Rachel glanced at Ethan as they began moving toward the signal's origin. "You okay?" she asked softly. Her tone was gentle, almost motherly, which fit her role perfectly. Rachel had a way of making everyone feel safe, even in the most uncertain situations. Ethan nodded once, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything, but Rachel didn't press him. She was used to his silence by now. Instead, she focused on scanning their surroundings, noting the unusual flora and fauna. The air smelled sweet, like blooming flowers mixed with something metallic. It was intoxicating but not unpleasant. They walked for nearly an hour before reaching the source of the signal. What they found was both fascinating and unsettling. Buried partially in the ground was a large crystalline structure, pulsating with soft blue light. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for centuries, untouched by time or weather. Daniel knelt beside it, running scans with his handheld device. "This is incredible," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It's emitting some kind of energy signature. I've never seen anything like it." Before anyone could respond, a low rumble echoed through the jungle. The ground trembled slightly, causing everyone to freeze. Then came the sound of snapping branches and heavy footsteps approaching fast. Something big was coming, and it wasn't. A lone dot from the shadows emerged, towering figures clad in dark biomechanical armor. Their bodies were sleek and muscular, exuding power and menace. Glowing red eyes scanned the humans with predatory intensity. These were predators, a species notorious for their love of hunting and their disdain for weaker beings. They carried advanced weapons strapped to their backs and war trophies from past kills dangling from their belts. "Stay calm," Lisa ordered through the coms, though her voice betrayed a hint of tension. "Do not provoke them," but provocation wasn't needed. One of the predators raised a clawed hand, signaling the others to attack. Bright beams of energy shot through the air, striking the ground around the humans. Chaos erupted instantly. Rachel dove for cover behind a fallen log, pulling out her medical kit in case anyone got hurt. Daniel scrambled to retrieve data from the crystal, knowing how valuable it could be. The other two crew members fired back with their pistols, trying to hold off the advancing aliens. Ethan reacted differently. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the shuttle, grabbing anyone he could reach along the way. His movements were fluid and deliberate, each step calculated to maximize efficiency. When one of the predators lunged at him, Ethan sidestepped, gracefully using the creature's momentum against it. With a swift kick, he sent it sprawling to the ground, buying precious seconds for his teammates. By the time they reached the shuttle, the situation had gone from bad to worse. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment, rendering the craft useless. Worse still, the predators had surrounded them, cutting off any chance of escape. "We're trapped," Rachel said, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the lead predator, a hulking brute adorned with jagged spikes protruding from its shoulders. The creature stepped forward, raising a weapon that crackled with energy. For a moment, it seemed like the end. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of firing, the predator tilted its head, studying Ethan with curiosity. Perhaps it sensed something different about him, something worth sparing. Whatever the reason, the creature lowered its weapon and barked an order to its companions. Moments later, Ethan and the surviving crew members were bound and dragged away, leaving the jungle and the mysterious crystal dash behind. As they were led deeper into the alien territory, Ethan allowed himself a brief glance backward. The shuttle lay in ruins, smoke curling into the sky. He didn't know what awaited them, but one thing was certain: survival would require more than luck. It would demand everything he had, and maybe even parts of himself he hadn't yet discovered. The predators moved quickly, their heavy footsteps crushing the underbrush as they marched Ethan and the surviving crew members deeper into the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and the faint glow of bioluminescent plants cast eerie shadows on the ground. Ethan's hands were bound tightly behind his back with some kind of metallic cord that burned cold against his skin. Despite the discomfort, he kept his breathing steady and his mind sharp. Panic wouldn't help him now. Rachel Dawson stumbled beside him, her face pale but determined. She had always been strong-willed, even in the worst situations, but Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. Daniel Hayes, the communications specialist, walked a few steps ahead, his head bowed as if trying to block out the reality of their predicament. His glasses hung crookedly on his nose, one lens cracked from the earlier chaos. The fourth member of their group, a junior engineer named Mark, limped along, clutching his side where a blast had grazed him during the attack. The predators didn't speak not in any language the humans could understand, but their body language was clear enough. They barked guttural commands at each other, occasionally shoving their captives forward when someone slowed down. Their glowing red eyes scanned the surroundings constantly, as if expecting an ambush. Ethan noticed how their armor seemed alive. shifting slightly with every movement as though it were fused to their bodies. It was both fascinating and terrifying. After what felt like hours, the group emerged from the dense jungle into a massive clearing. In the center stood a towering fortress carved directly into the mountainside. The structure looked ancient, its stone walls covered in intricate carvings that depicted scenes of battles and hunts. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the edges, pulsing with the same blue light they'd seen in the crystalline artifact back in the jungle. The sight sent a chill down Ethan's spine. This wasn't just a base, it was a temple, a monument to the Predator's violent culture. The humans were dragged inside through a wide-arched entrance. The interior was dimly lit, with torches burning a sickly green flame mounted along the walls. The air smelled of smoke and something metallic, like blood. Chains clinked softly in. The distance and low growls echoed through the corridors. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a stronghold, it was a hunting ground. They were led into a large chamber where several predators waited, their weapons slung over their shoulders. At the far end of the room stood a figure who commanded attention. He was taller than the others, easily 10 feet tall, with broad shoulders and armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. Spikes jutted from his chest plate, and a jagged crest ran along the top of his helmet. His presence filled the room, making everyone else, including his own kind, seem smaller by comparison. This was Krylok, the Predator General. Even without knowing his title, Ethan could tell he was the leader. There was an aura of authority around him, a sense that he didn't need to speak to make his dominance known. When Krylok finally stepped forward, the other predators fell silent, stepping aside to give him space. Krylok approached the captives slowly, his glowing red eyes scanning them one by one. He stopped in front of Rachel first, tilting his head as if studying her. Then he moved to Daniel, sniffing the air briefly before turning away. When he reached Mark, he paused, his clawed hand reaching out to grab the injured man's chin. Mark flinched but didn't resist. Krylok let out a low growl, then shoved Mark aside dismissively, as if deciding he wasn't worth his time. Finally, Krylok turned to Ethan. For a long moment, the two simply stared at each other. Ethan didn't look away, even though every instinct told him to drop his gaze. Something about Krylok's piercing stare demanded submission, but Ethan refused to give it. He stood tall, his expression calm despite the storm raging inside him. Krylok tilted his head again, this time with curiosity rather than disdain. He raised a clawed hand, tapping a device attached to his wrist. A mechanical voice crackled to life. Speaking in broken but understandable English, "You are weak," Krylok said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're kind. Fragile. No honor." Ethan didn't respond. They hadn't untied his hands, and even if they had, he doubted words would matter here. But his silence spoke volumes. It wasn't defiance exactly. It was something quieter, more deliberate. He wasn't afraid, and that intrigued Krylok. The Predator General circled Ethan slowly, his claws clicking against the floor. "You fight?" he asked, stopping in front of him again. "Prove yourself?" Ethan hesitated for a split second, then nodded once. It wasn't a question he wanted to answer, but he knew what was at stake. If he didn't take this chance, all of them would die. And so, without saying a word, he agreed to whatever challenge Krylok had in mind. Krylok let out a deep, rumbling laugh, clearly pleased. He gestured to his warriors, who began dragging the humans toward separate cells. Ethan caught Rachel's eye as she was pulled away, and she gave him a small, reassuring smile. Daniel tried to say something, but his voice was drowned out by the clang of closing metal doors. Within moments, Ethan found himself alone in a dark, damp cell. The only light came from a narrow slit high up on the wall, barely illuminating the rough stone floor. Time passed slowly. Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold ground, focusing on his breathing. He knew better than to waste energy worrying about things he couldn't control. Instead, he replayed the events of the day in his mind, analyzing every detail. The predators were hunters, and this fortress was their playground. They thrived on violence and domination, but there was also a code to their behavior, a twisted sense of honor that valued strength and cunning above all else. If Ethan could tap into that, if he could show them he wasn't just another weak human to be toyed with, maybe he could turn the situation to his advantage. Hours later, or perhaps days. It was hard to tell. The cell door creaked open. Two predators entered, their weapons drawn. One of them grabbed Ethan by the arm and hauled him to his feet, while the other cut the bindings around his wrists. Ethan flexed his fingers, wincing as feeling returned to his numb hands. He followed silently as they led him back to the main chamber, where Kralok awaited. This time the room was crowded. Dozens of predators lined the walls, watching intently as Ethan was brought before their leader. Kralok stood at the center, holding a wicked-looking blade in one hand. He tossed it onto the floor in front of Ethan, the metallic clang echoing loudly. "Fight," Kralok said, his mechanical voice booming across the chamber. "Survive!" Before Ethan could react, another figure stepped into the arena, a hulking gladiator chained to a leash held by one of the predators. The creature was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its body was a grotesque mix of muscle and machinery, with cybernetic implants covering half its face and arms. Glowing veins pulsed beneath its grayish skin, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. It roared, a sound that shook the very walls of the chamber. The predators released the chains, and the gladiator lunged at Ethan without hesitation. Instinct took over. Ethan ducked under the creature's massive fist, rolling to the side to avoid being crushed. He grabbed the blade from the floor, testing its weight in his hand. It was heavier than he expected, but manageable. As the gladiator turned to face him again, Ethan planted his feet firmly, ready to defend himself. The fight was brutal. The gladiator swung wildly, its blows powerful enough to shatter bone. Ethan dodged and weaved, using his smaller size and agility to stay out of reach. Whenever he saw an opening, he struck with the blade, aiming for vulnerable spots between the creature's mechanical parts. Each hit drew a roar of pain, but the gladiator didn't slow down. It was relentless, driven by rage and programming. Ethan's muscles burned with exhaustion, and sweat dripped into his eyes, blurring his vision. He stumbled, narrowly avoiding a kick that sent chunks of stone flying. The crowd of predators cheered, their voices rising in excitement. Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't afford to lose concentration, not even for a second, then inspiration struck. Remembering the layout of the chamber, Ethan feigned weakness, allowing the gladiator to corner him against a pillar. Just as the creature raised its arm for a final blow, Ethan sidestepped at the last moment. The gladiator's fist slammed into the pillar instead, cracking the stone. Before it could recover, Ethan drove the blade deep into its exposed neck, twisting it sharply. The creature let out a gurgling scream before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. The room fell silent. Ethan stood panting, blood dripping from the blade in his hand. He looked up at Kralok, who regarded him with an unreadable expression. After a long pause, the Predator General raised his hand, signaling the end of the fight. The crowd erupted into cheers, their approval deafening. Kralok stepped forward, standing directly in front of Ethan. "You live," he said, his mechanical voice tinged with something close to respect. For now, Ethan didn't relax. He knew this was only the beginning. Ethan's victory in the arena earned him a brief reprieve, but it didn't mean safety. The predators dragged him back to his cell, though this time they didn't bind his hands. His body ached from the fight, and fresh cuts stung as sweat dripped. Into them, he sat on the cold stone floor, letting the adrenaline fade. For the first time since arriving on the planet, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. His mind racing over what had just happened, he knew he'd been lucky. The gladiator had been strong, but its brute force made it predictable. Ethan's quick thinking and agility had given him the edge he needed to survive. Still, luck wouldn't last forever. Kralok wasn't done testing him, and Ethan suspected that the next challenge would be far worse. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. As Ethan rested, the fortress buzzed with activity. Word of his performance spread quickly among the predators, sparking a mix of curiosity and admiration. To them, strength and cunning were virtues, and Ethan's ability to outwit a superior opponent marked him as unusual. Some whispered that he might be worthy of respect, while others dismissed him as nothing more than a fleeting amusement. Either way, Ethan had become a topic of conversation, and that gave him a small advantage. If he could keep surprising them, maybe he could buy enough time to figure a way out. Hours passed before the cell door opened again. This time, 2 predators entered, their weapons lowered. One of them gestured for Ethan to follow. He rose slowly, his muscles protesting as he stood. They led him through the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress, past rooms filled with trophy skulls mounted on walls, claws strung together like garlands, and strange artifacts collected from countless hunts. Each item told a story of conquest, a testament to the predator's obsession with dominance. Ethan kept his expression neutral. Refusing to show fear or disgust, they arrived at a large chamber different from the one where he'd fought the gladiator. This room was brighter, lit by glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling. In the center stood a series of platforms suspended above pits filled with sharp spikes. Chains hung from the walls, and mechanical devices hummed softly, ready to spring into action. It was clear this place was designed for combat, a gauntlet meant to test endurance and skill. Kralok waited at the far end of the chamber, flanked by several of his warriors. When Ethan approached, the Predator General pointed to the platforms. "Survive," he said simply, his mechanical voice devoid of emotion. Then he stepped back, leaving Ethan alone in the arena. The first wave of opponents came quickly. 3 smaller predators emerged from hidden entrances, their movements swift and coordinated. Unlike the gladiator, these fighters relied on speed and precision. They wielded blades and nets, aiming to trap Ethan rather than overpower him. He dodged their initial attacks, using the platforms to his advantage. Leaping between them forced the predators to split up, making it harder for them to surround him. One of them lunged, swinging a net toward Ethan. He ducked, grabbing the edge of the platform to swing underneath it. The net missed, tangling around the predator instead. Before it could free itself, Ethan kicked off the wall, driving his shoulder into the creature's chest. The impact sent both of them tumbling onto another platform, but Ethan recovered faster. He grabbed a fallen blade and plunged it into the predator's side, ending the fight. The remaining 2 predators adjusted their strategy, working together to corner him. Ethan countered by using the environment against them. He pushed one of the platforms loose, sending it crashing into a pit below. The sudden movement startled the predators, giving Ethan an opening to strike. With quick slashes, he disarmed one and wounded the other, forcing them to retreat. The crowd roared with approval, their cheers echoing through the chamber. Ethan ignored them, focusing on conserving his energy. He knew this was only the beginning of the gauntlet, and each round would grow more difficult. His body screamed for rest, but he pushed through the pain, knowing that stopping meant death. The second wave brought new challenges. This time, the predators unleashed hybrid creatures, part animal, part machine. Their bodies rippled with muscle, and their eyes glowed with feral intelligence. They moved unpredictably, darting in and out of shadows. Ethan struggled to keep track of their movements. His reflexes tested to their limits. One of the hybrids pounced, its claws slashing across Ethan's arm. He grunted in pain, stumbling backward. Blood seeped from the wound, but he couldn't afford to focus on it. Another hybrid charged, its jaws snapping inches from his face. Ethan sidestepped, grabbing a nearby chain and wrapping it around the creature's neck. Using all his strength, he yanked hard, pulling the hybrid off balance. As it thrashed, he drove the blade into its skull, silencing it. The third hybrid circled him cautiously, its tail lashing behind it like a whip. Ethan waited, his breathing steady despite the chaos around him. When the creature finally attacked, he rolled forward, avoiding its deadly tail. He came up behind it, plunging the blade into its spine. The hybrid collapsed with a guttural roar, joining its companions in defeat. By now, Ethan's body was battered and bruised. His shirt was torn, revealing deep gashes and burns. Sweat mixed with blood, dripping onto the platforms as he fought to stay upright. The crowd's cheers grew louder, their excitement palpable. Even Kralok watched intently, his glowing eyes fixed on Ethan. The final wave was the most brutal. A single opponent emerged, a massive gladiator even larger than the one Ethan had faced earlier. Its body was covered in reinforced armor, and its right arm ended in a serrated blade. It moved with terrifying efficiency, every step calculated to intimidate. Ethan tightened his grip on the blade in his hand. Knowing this fight would push him to his limit, the gladiator attacked without warning. Its blade slicing through the air, Ethan barely managed to dodge, the tip grazing his shoulder. Pain shot through his arm, and he realized the blade was poisoned. His vision blurred slightly, but he forced himself to stay focused. He couldn't afford to falter now. Using the platforms to create distance, Ethan studied the gladiator's movements. Its attacks were powerful but slow, leaving openings if he timed his counters perfectly. He feigned weakness, allowing the gladiator to chase him across the arena. When it raised its arm for a killing blow, Ethan struck, driving the blade into its exposed joint. The gladiator howled in agony, stumbling backward, but it wasn't finished. Enraged, it swung wildly, catching Ethan off guard. The force of the blow sent him flying into one of the chains. Metal links dug into his flesh as he landed awkwardly, his left arm trapped beneath him. Agony surged through his body, and when he tried to move, he realized his arm was broken or worse. The gladiator loomed over him, its blade poised to strike. Ethan gritted his teeth, refusing to give up. With his remaining strength, he grabbed the chain and pulled himself upward, using it to swing around the gladiator. Momentum carried him high enough to deliver a devastating kick to the creature's head. Stunned, the gladiator staggered, giving Ethan the chance to grab a shard of broken metal from the floor. Summoning every ounce of determination, he drove the makeshift weapon into the gladiator's throat. The creature collapsed, lifeless, as the crowd erupted into deafening cheers. Ethan sank to his knees, clutching his injured arm. Blood pooled beneath him, and his vision swam. But he was alive, and so were Rachel and Daniel. That thought alone kept him conscious. Kralok approached, his expression unreadable. He knelt beside Ethan, examining the young cadet's injuries. After a moment, he spoke. "You are strong," he said, his mechanical voice quieter than before. "Stronger than I expected." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. His body had reached its limit, and darkness began to creep in at the edges of his vision. Before he lost consciousness, he heard Kralok issue an order. "Take him to the healer. He will need strength for the final trial." When Ethan woke, he found himself in a dimly lit room. His wounds had been treated, and his arm was immobilized in a crude splint. Rachel sat nearby, her face lighting up with relief when she saw him stir. "You're awake," she whispered, leaning closer. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a shuttle," Ethan muttered, his voice hoarse. He glanced around, noticing Daniel asleep in a corner. "What happened?" "We've been trying to figure that out," Rachel admitted. "After your fight," Kralok ordered. "U.S. brought here. We're being held separately, but they haven't hurt us, not yet anyway." Ethan nodded, processing the information. "We need a plan," he said quietly. "If we can sabotage their equipment or find a way to signal the eclipse, we might have a chance." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do what I can, just don't try anything reckless, okay?" "You've done enough." Ethan didn't argue. He knew she was right. For now, survival was the priority. But deep down, he vowed to protect his friends, no matter the cost. Ethan woke up in the dimly lit room, his body aching and his mind racing. The predators had treated his wounds, but the pain in his arm was still sharp, a constant reminder of the brutal fight he'd endured. Rachel sat nearby, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes filled with determination. Daniel slept in the corner, his glasses askew on his nose, his chest rising and falling steadily. Ethan tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back down. "You need to rest," Rachel whispered, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've been through enough." Ethan shook his head slightly. "We don't have time for that," he said, his voice low but firm. "Kralok isn't done with me yet. If we want to survive, we need a plan." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a communicator salvaged from one of the predator's tools. "I managed to grab this while they were distracted," she explained. It's not much, but maybe we can use it to send a signal to the eclipse. If anyone's still alive up there, they might be able to track us. Ethan studied the device, his brow furrowing. Do you know how to work it? He asked. Not completely, Rachel admitted. But Daniel does. He's been trying to figure it out while you were unconscious. At the sound of their voices, Daniel stirred, blinking groggy. When he saw Ethan awake, he straightened up, pushing his glasses further up his nose. Hey, he said, his voice raspy. Good to see you're still with us. Any luck with the communicator? Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated, then held up the device. I think I've got the basics figured out, he said, but we'll need power. This thing doesn't have much juice left. We'll find a way, Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. For now, keep working on it, and stay quiet. We don't know who's listening. The three of them fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Ethan closed his eyes, replaying the events of the past few days in his mind. Every fight, every decision had brought him closer to this moment. Kralok's final trial loomed ahead, and Ethan knew it would be unlike anything he'd faced before. But he also knew that fear wouldn't help him. He had to focus, to stay sharp. Hours later, the door to their cell creaked open. Two predators entered, their weapons drawn. One of them gestured for Ethan to follow. Rachel started to protest, but Ethan gave her a quick glance, silently telling her to stay calm. He rose slowly, ignoring the throbbing pain in his arm, and walked toward the predators. They led him back to the main chamber, where Kralok waited. The Predator General stood at the center of the room, his armored frame towering over everyone else. Around him, the other predators gathered, their glowing red eyes fixed on Ethan. The air was thick with tension, anticipation crackling like static electricity. Kralok stepped forward, raising a clawed hand to silence the crowd. You have proven yourself worthy, Kralok said, his mechanical voice booming across the chamber. Now you will face your greatest challenge, the hunter himself. Ethan didn't flinch. He locked eyes with Kralok, refusing to show any sign of fear. What happens if I win? He asked, his voice steady. Kralok tilted his head as if considering the question. If you defeat me, he said after a pause, you and your comrades will be free to leave. My warriors will honor our code, and if I lose? Ethan pressed. Kralok's lips curled into what might have been a smile. Then you die, he said simply, and your friends become trophies. Ethan nodded once, accepting the terms without hesitation. He knew there was no turning back now. This was the only way to ensure Rachel and Daniel's survival and his own. The duel began moments later. Kralok drew a massive blade from his belt, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. He swung it effortlessly, testing its weight in his hand. Ethan, meanwhile, picked up a smaller weapon from the ground, a jagged piece of metal he'd used in the gauntlet. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. Kral attacked first, his movements surprisingly fast for someone of his size. He lunged forward, bringing the blade down in a powerful arc. Ethan barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side just in time. The blade struck the ground with such force that it left a deep crack in the stone floor. Ethan countered quickly, aiming for Kralok's exposed midsection. But the Predator General was ready. He parried the strike with ease, knocking Ethan off balance. Pain shot through Ethan's injured arm as he stumbled, but he forced himself to stay upright. He couldn't afford to make mistakes, not against an opponent like Kralok. The battle continued, each exchange more intense than the last. Kralok's strength was overwhelming, his blows capable of shattering bone. But Ethan relied on speed and agility, darting in and out of range, looking for weaknesses in the general's armor. Every time he landed a hit, Kralok roared in anger, his attacks growing more reckless. You are clever, Kralok growled during a brief lull in the fight. But cleverness alone will not save you, Ethan didn't respond. He focused on the rhythm of the duel, studying Kralok's movements. The Predator General was skilled, but he fought with raw power rather than precision. That was his flaw, and Ethan intended to exploit it. As the fight dragged on, Ethan noticed something. Kralok's armor was slowing him down. The heavy plates restricted his mobility, making it harder for him to adjust to Ethan's unpredictable tactics. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan feinted to the left, drawing Kralok's attention. When the general swung his blade, Ethan ducked under the attack and drove his makeshift weapon into the joint of Kralok's armor. The Predator General staggered, roaring in pain. For the first time, there was uncertainty in his glowing red eyes. Ethan pressed his advantage, striking again and again, targeting the same weak points. Each blow weakened Kralok further, chipping away at his defenses. Finally, with a desperate cry, Kralok charged forward, abandoning all caution. Ethan sidestepped at the last moment, using Kralok's momentum against him. As the general stumbled, Ethan grabbed a chain hanging from the ceiling and wrapped it around Kralok's neck. With all his strength, he yanked hard, pulling the Predator. General off balance, Kralok crashed to the ground, his blade slipping from his grasp. Ethan moved quickly, pinning him down and driving the jagged piece of metal into the vulnerable spot beneath Kralok's helmet. The Predator General let out a final, guttural roar before going still. The room fell silent. The other Predators stared in shock, their leader defeated by a human. For a moment, Ethan wondered if they would turn on him, seeking revenge for Kralok's death. But instead, one of them stepped forward, a warrior with a scar running across his face. He raised a fist to his chest and bowed deeply. "The human has earned his freedom," the warrior declared, his voice carrying authority. "We honor our code." The rest of the Predators followed suit, bowing in unison. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing the fight was truly over. He turned to look at Rachel and Daniel, who had been brought to the chamber to witness the duel. Their faces were pale with relief, tears streaming down Rachel's cheeks. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. He didn't feel victorious, only tired. The cost of survival had been high, and he knew the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger for a long time. But for now they were alive, and that was enough. Back aboard the Eclipse, Captain Lisa Monroe greeted the survivors with a mixture of relief and pride. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the damaged ship, preparing it for the journey home. Ethan kept to himself as usual, but there was a subtle change in how the others treated him. They spoke to him with respect, their curiosity replaced by admiration. Rachel and Daniel shared stories of Ethan's heroics, ensuring that his actions inspired others. Even Captain Monroe acknowledged his bravery, praising him during a meeting with the senior officers. "Cadet Cole has shown us what true courage looks like," she said. "He reminded us that even in the darkest moments, hope can prevail." Ethan listened quietly, his gaze fixed on the stars outside the viewport. He didn't need words to express how he felt. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but he was ready to face whatever came next. Not because he sought glory, but because he believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And somewhere deep within him, a spark ignited, a promise to keep fighting, no matter the odds. The Eclipse hummed softly as it drifted through the endless void of space. Repairs had been completed, and the ship was finally ready to leave the uncharted region behind. For the first time in days, the crew allowed themselves to breathe easier. The immediate danger had passed, but the scars of their ordeal lingered. Broken equipment lined the corridors, a reminder of the attack that had nearly cost them their lives. Empty bunks stood as silent tributes to those who hadn't made it back. Ethan Cole sat alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. His injured arm rested in a sling, and fresh bandages covered the cuts and bruises on his face. Despite the pain, he looked calm, almost peaceful. The silence suited him, it always had, but now it carried a new weight. He replayed the events of the past few days in his mind, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Each memory felt like a puzzle piece, slowly coming together to form a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Rachel Dawson entered the room quietly, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee. She handed one to Ethan without saying a word. He accepted it with a nod, wrapping his good hand around the warm mug. Rachel sat beside him, her eyes following his gaze out the window. "You did what you had to do," she said softly after a moment. "No one blames you." Ethan didn't respond right away. He took a sip of the coffee, letting its warmth spread through him. "I killed their leader," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Doesn't matter if they honored their code. I still took something from them. Rachel hesitated, unsure how to respond. She knew Ethan well enough by now to understand that he wasn't looking for reassurance. He carried burdens no one else could fully comprehend, and he preferred to deal with them in his own way. Still, she couldn't stay silent. You saved us, she said firmly. If you hadn't fought Kralok, we'd all be dead or worse. You gave us a chance to live. Ethan stared into his cup, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Instead, he changed the subject. What about Daniel? Is he okay? Rachel nodded. He's fine. Exhausted, but fine. He's been working nonstop to fix the CUM system so we can send a report to command. He says it'll take a few more hours, but he's close. Good, Ethan said simply. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. The exhaustion hit him like a wave, threatening to pull him under. But he forced himself to stay awake. There was too much to think about, too many questions without answers. Later that evening, Captain Lisa Monroe called a meeting in the briefing room. The surviving senior officers gathered around the table, their faces a mix of relief and determination. Ethan sat near the back, his usual spot, listening intently as Lisa spoke. We've been through hell, she began, her tone serious but steady. But we're alive because of the courage and quick thinking of everyone here, especially Cadet. Cole. She paused, turning to look directly at Ethan. Your actions saved this crew. Ethan, you stood up when no one else could, and you faced an enemy stronger than any of us had ever seen. That takes guts. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Avoiding eye contact, he didn't want praise. He just wanted to move on. But Lisa wasn't finished. When we return to base, I'll recommend you for promotion, she continued. You've earned it. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but Ethan shook his head slightly. I don't need recognition, he said quietly. I just want to keep doing my job. Lisa studied him for a long moment before nodding. Fair enough, she said. But know this, you've earned the respect of everyone on this ship, and that's not something to take lightly. The meeting ended shortly after, with the crew dispersing to resume their duties. Ethan stayed behind, lingering in the empty room. The weight of Lisa's words pressed down on him, though he couldn't explain why. Respect wasn't something. He saw it, yet it seemed to follow him wherever he went. That night, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the ship aimlessly, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet corridors. Most of the crew had retired to their quarters, leaving the halls deserted. Eventually, he ended up in the cargo bay, where the mysterious crystalline artifact from the jungle had been stored. It glowed faintly in the darkness, its blue light pulsing rhythmically. Almost like a heartbeat, Ethan approached it cautiously, studying its intricate surface. Strange symbols etched into the crystal shimmered as if alive, shifting and rearranging themselves in patterns he couldn't decipher. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the cool surface. A sudden surge of energy ran through him, sharp and electric, causing him to stumble back. What are you? He muttered under his breath, staring at the artifact. It didn't answer, of course, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that it held secrets far beyond his understanding. Secrets that might explain why the predators had been drawn to the planet and why they had attacked the eclipse. As he stood there, lost in thought, Rachel appeared in the doorway. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, stepping closer. Ethan shook his head. This thing... It's not natural, he said, gesturing toward the crystal. It's like it's alive. Rachel frowned, examining the artifact. Do you think it's connected to the signal we picked up? She asked. Maybe, Ethan replied. Or maybe it's something older, something the predators were guarding. Rachel crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. If that's true, then we might have stumbled onto something bigger then. We realized something dangerous, Ethan nodded grimly. We should report it to command, he said. They'll need to know. Agreed, Rachel said. But for now, let's focus on getting home, one step at a time. The next morning, the eclipse jumped to hyperspace, leaving the mysterious planet far behind. The crew worked tirelessly. to restore normalcy, repairing damaged systems, and documenting their encounter with the predators. Daniel managed to repair the communications array just in time to send a detailed report to command, including images of the artifact and descriptions of the fortress. Ethan spent most of his time helping Rachel in the medical bay, assisting with treatments for the injured crew members. His quiet presence brought comfort to those who were struggling, even if he rarely spoke. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere aboard the ship began to shift. Fear gave way to resilience, and despair transformed into hope. One evening, as the ship sailed through the stars, Ethan joined Rachel and Daniel in the mess hall. They sat together at a small table, sharing a meal and talking quietly. For the first time in days, laughter filled the air, a fragile but genuine sound. "You know," Daniel said between bites, "if anyone had told me a week ago that I'd be sitting here cracking jokes after fighting off alien hunters, I'd have called them crazy," Rachel chuckled. "Same here," she admitted. "But here we are." Ethan smiled faintly, though. His eyes remained distant. "We got lucky," he said. "Next time, we might not be so fortunate." "No one's arguing that," Rachel replied. "But we made it through, together, and that counts for something." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, each one a beacon of possibility. He didn't know what lay ahead, whether it would bring more danger or unexpected peace, but he felt a strange sense of resolve. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on as the ship hummed steadily beneath their feet, carrying them toward home. Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the choices he'd made, the lives he'd saved, and the sacrifices he'd endured. It wasn't easy being the person others looked to in times of crisis, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Not anymore. Somewhere deep within him, a spark ignited, a quiet promise to keep fighting, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, but Ethan Cole was ready. Silent, determined, and unyielding, he would stand firm against whatever challenges awaited.